Electronics and mountain biking. Two things you typically wouldn't associate together, but like it or not, these two worlds are beginning to collide. Nowadays, we have batteries that power motors which propel us up the hill on e-bikes. The industry and most riders are really accepting of batteries in this case. We've got derailleurs that are powered by batteries. Not everyone's on board with the wireless drivetrain revolution, but like it or not, they are becoming more and more common, and some manufacturers have some catching up to do, or they risk being left in the dust. Batteries power some pretty fancy and admittedly expensive dropper posts. While the price can be off-putting to some, I think that wireless dropper posts are a pretty nifty thing. If you own multiple bikes, it just might be your ticket to the one seat post to rule them all. And finally, we're starting to see batteries and wireless technology controlling mountain bike suspension. And that is why we're here today. Fox has just released their Neo live valve rear suspension, and we're gonna check it out and see if it's the future of mountain bike suspension or if it's just a fancy new doodad to throw on your bike. So Fox was nice enough to send over a brand new Float X Neo live valve rear shock that will fit my Forbidden Druid here. So I'm gonna mount this rear shock as well as all the included and required sensors and batteries onto my bike and see what all these blinking lights and battery operated motors controlling suspension are all about. While I'm thumbing through installation manuals, downloading apps, and making sure all the connectivity is happening, I am going to send the camera over into our shop where I want to talk with some of my coworkers and see what they think about batteries and wireless technology in mountain biking. So let's head over to the shop while I get this thing set up. All right, Jan, our graphic designer here. We want to know your opinions on electronics and batteries on mountain bike equipment. So first up, e-bikes.
I think e-bikes are cool, going super far, or for people who have disabilities. I think that's really cool, but definitely need acoustic bikes to stay around for sure.
Derailleurs and batteries.
Also pretty neat, accessibility type thing, people with disabilities who don't have power to necessarily like push a mechanical actuator, but same thing, definitely gotta keep that analog stuff around.
Dropper posts.
The more stuff you put batteries on, the more complicated your bike gets.
All right, and then finally, rear suspension.
I don't know anything about that. I guess it could be cool. I would just be curious how reliable it is.
All right, we've got our retail expert, Zach, here. Opinions on e-bikes.
Opinions, not for me.
Derailleurs.
Sure, absolutely, why not? All these new bikes and all the weird internal routing. Let's get rid of friction and have good shifting, I'm down.
Electronic dropper posts.
I want all of them to be that way, so you can take it off your bike and put it on another bike instead of spending 30 minutes having to route it through.
Perfect. And finally, electronics and suspension.
Sure, I'm sure they've come pretty far since the old K2 no lean stuff with the piezoelectric measurements and whatnot. So yeah, let's jump in.
All right, Frank, you are a receiving man. We want some opinions on electronics and mountain bike components.
Okay.
So e-bikes.
I think they're great, super fun, tow your friends around, kind of gives you a bit of a superpower.
Electronic derailleurs.
My wife really loves them. My wallet doesn't when it inevitably meets an immovable object.
Electronic dropper posts.
Checked a couple of them in. They are a little bit too rich for my budget.
Okay.
But they seem sweet.
And electronic suspension.
Can work for the pros, but from what I've seen of anybody else, not really worth it unless it's given to you.
All right, we are here with Joey, our wheel building wizard. Start off with bikes.
Battery powered bicycles?
Yeah.
They're not for me. I had an e-bike for a commuter. It was cool. Sold that, got a motorcycle. It's way better. For mountain bikes, I kind of understand the appeal, but for most of us, I think they're necessary.
Electronic derailleurs.
100% in on electronic derailleurs. I have them on my mountain bike, my flat bar gravel bike. Fan of them. They're awesome.
Wireless electronic dropper posts.
Yes, they should be cheaper. They should be on every bike. The cable routing on droppers is the biggest issue that I think we run into with our demo bikes and with fixing bikes for folks. Kind of a pain in the ass.
Electronics on suspension.
Probably unnecessary for most of us. I ride my suspension wide open, but if some folks need that extra accessory to make them a mountain biker, I'm all for it.
All right, we have been graced by the mayor of Bellingham here, EB, and we want to know your opinions on some electronics and mountain bike components. E-bikes first.
I think e-bikes have a place. I think they're fun. Anybody who's willing to shuttle a bike up a mountain in the back of a truck can't poo-poo an e-bike, in my opinion.
Electronics and derailleurs.
Interesting. I think I've ridden some of the Axis stuff, and I would have to do more than a couple rides to get used to it. And I'm not sure how I feel about the auto shifting, to be honest with you.
Electronics and dropper posts.
I think that is going to be the one game changer. Everybody hates having to route cables for dropper posts. That's a pain in the butt no matter what bike you're on.
Finally, electronics and rear suspension.
Ooh, I think that's going to be really funny because I'm a set and forget kind of guy. I leave my stuff, I set it where I like it, and I usually leave it. I make very few changes. So the idea of it basically changing over different types of terrain or what you're doing, whether you're pedaling or descending, is interesting to me from the standpoint of just not having to touch stuff to do those different things. I know it's all pretty new, but I'm interested in trying it when it kind of becomes a little more mainstream.
Sweet, perfect. Well, thanks for your opinions.
All right,
I've got the new Fox Neo live valve system all installed on my bike. Honestly, pretty simple, easy process. They do include this little manual that walks you through what you need to do. It's really thick because it has several different languages in there. Honestly, I didn't really use that. What I did use though was the Fox Bike app. Super simple, walks you through the whole pairing process. Didn't take me that long. Yes, it's a bit longer than installing a regular non-electronically actuated shock because you have to deal with these sensors and pairing things up, but pretty quick, painless, easy process in my opinion. So while I was getting this whole system installed on my bike, we went over to the shop and chatted with some of my coworkers to get their thoughts on electronics and mountain bike components. Some love them, some hate them, some are pretty indifferent. I personally fall into the, I think they're pretty cool camp. Wireless derailleurs, been running them for 4+ years. Haven't really had any issues. I can think of one ride over that 4 years that was ruined because of an issue with the electronics on my bike. And honestly, that probably happens with mechanical stuff just as much. So I don't feel like they're a detriment to anything. Do they add value? Not necessarily. Shift's about the same, but cleans up my cockpit, makes things look cool. I think it's pretty nifty. Wireless dropper posts, like I've mentioned before, I really love those. I'm spoiled. I own 3 mountain bikes and I have 1 dropper post and it's a wireless one and I swap it from bike to bike depending on which one I'm riding. I think that's pretty cool. It's pretty nifty. You don't have to route cables through your bikes. It's just you put it in, you put the remote on, and you go. Really love that. So now we're gonna give wirelessly actuated suspension a try. I don't, usually flip climb switches on my shocks. I usually just run it fully open. So we'll see if this kind of adds any value, if it makes maybe the climbing experience better, maybe more efficient for me. I will say, one cool thing I noticed on that Fox app was they have a bunch of different tunes that they've developed. So right out of the box, it's got an open, a standard, and a firm, and it will kind of bias towards one end or the other depending on which one you want to run. You can easily swap that here in the app. I did also notice they have some available downloadable tunes. So they've got 2 in here called the Traction and the Shore tune. That's pretty sweet. You can download these tunes that Fox has developed. The Traction tune was developed by Fox engineers in the American Southwest. Good for areas where traction is hard to find. So if I was going to go to the desert, might be interesting to try that tune out. They have the Shore tune developed by Fox for the rooty, rugged terrain of the Pacific Northwest of North America. Good anywhere where the climbs are technical as the descents. The Shore's right across the border. If I go up there and ride that, might be something to throw on there. I am going to start out in the standard tune. So let's get out there, ride this new Neo suspension, and see what it's all about. We're finally out of the studio and we are actually riding this new live valve rear shock. I am climbing up a service road to one of my favorite trails. It's a trail called Dad Bod. As the name maybe implies, it is a bit of a lumpy trail. So it's got, some pretty rough, lumpy sections, but it also has some flat, pedally bits and some punchy uphill climbs. And I think that's a perfect place to test out Neo live valve rear suspension. And as you would assume, the live valve turned off the shock. It's locked out, giving me maximum efficiency to kind of grunt up these hills. These sensors are reading the terrain and they're locking that shock out. Nice thing if you are climbing, say, some technical single track, it's got some obstacles in it. These sensors are reading the trail hundreds of times and opening and closing that shock as needed. So if I were to encounter some technical stuff where I needed some traction, it would open that shock up, give me the traction I need, and then firm up to give me that efficiency to keep climbing. So that's pretty neat. There is the new Fox Bike app. And this app, you're going to want to download it if you want to unlock the full potential of Neo. For those power users who really want to geek out on this stuff, you do have the ability to create your own tunes and adjust things like the sensitivity of the sensors. if you want to unlock the full potential of Neo, you're going to want to get the Fox Bike app. I have been riding the shock for quite a while, got about 16 hours on it already, and my battery's showing about 20%. So after this ride, I will definitely make sure I'm charging that battery, but it's got a pretty good life to it and only takes about an hour or two to charge that thing. And for those people worried about, hey, what if my battery dies or I forget the battery in the car or something like that, without power, the shock will default to fully open, so you don't have to worry about riding a rigid full suspension bike if you do forget your battery. I'm gonna keep grinding up this road, get up to dad bod, so we'll see you up there. So I don't know if you've ever been on one of those rides where you block out your shock for the climb, get to the top, drop in the trail, go down, bike feels funny, and you get to the bottom and realize you locked your shock out and had it locked out on the descent. Well, with live valve, that is not a problem. As soon as you drop in, shock will open itself up. These sensors are reading the trail hundreds if not thousands of times during your ride, and they say they can send a signal from the sensor to the shock in 1/70th of a second. So I think that's probably quicker than I can even react to the trail. This is one of those flat pedally sections where things are gonna firm up, and then when you hit some bumps, open right up for you. Little climb, you're pedaling, you can feel that shock firming up there, giving you efficiency, helping you carry speed a little better. And then as soon as we get down and we're descending again, we're hitting some bumps and that shock is wide open, letting us take some little jumps and doubles. And then boom, we're right back in it, another climb. I'm grinding my gears, but shock is locking itself out. So I also rode this shock on a jump trail earlier, and I was kind of worried maybe the on-offness of the shock would make things funky, maybe buck me on the jumps, but it was all good. Nice and firm on the takeoff and soft when I inevitably cased the jump. We're on the last little bits of dad bod, and just like your dad, it's not all fun and games. Sometimes he's got some chores, he's got some work for you. And in order to get out of this trail, we do have a nice punchy climb, but thank God we've got Fox Neo's live valve to firm up and give us some extra efficiency for this nice punchy climb we gotta make out of here. See you back at the house, dog. All right, so I've gotten a few rides here on the new Fox Neo rear suspension. And one of the first questions I asked when we were starting this video was, does this add any value to your biking, or is it kind of just a gimmicky doodad? With wireless drivetrains and wireless dropper posts, a lot of detractors will say they don't add any value. And I'm not gonna lie, that's probably true. My wireless derailleur and my wireless dropper post function just the same as if I had mechanical ones. It doesn't really add any value to my riding. It does make my cockpit look pretty cool, but that's about it. With the wireless suspension, I think there actually might be some value added there. With a standard shock, you do have a climb switch, and you can definitely close that climb switch on a climb and have an efficient pedaling platform. But what sets the new Fox Neo stuff apart from a regular rear shock is how often it's doing that. It's doing it hundreds of times during your ride, whether you're climbing or you're on a flatter section, or, you know, maybe just a less aggressive downhill section. The sensors that are on your fork and the rear of your bike are reading the trail hundreds of times a second and telling the rear shock whether to be open or fully closed. And this is gonna lead you to a more efficient ride. So maybe you're somebody that races your bike and you want the best equipment for your race run. Fox Neo could be something that helps. Maybe you're doing an enduro race and one of the tracks you're doing has a short punchy uphill section. If your shock is just gonna automatically close itself and give you that efficiency to power up that climb, you're gonna have a distinct advantage. Everyday riders, you might not need it, but this is something that's really cool and adds to your ride. My very first ride on this suspension was like an all-day adventure, 6,000 feet of climbing, up and over a couple hills. And honestly, by the end of the ride, I felt like I could go do more because the shock had locked itself out automatically when I needed it, and I was just climbing so much more efficient. My legs weren't as tired. It was pretty cool. I was definitely worried before I dropped into the first trail. I was like, okay, suspension feels firm. This better open up. But as soon as we dropped into the descent, didn't even notice it. The shock just felt like a regular old shock. So in my honest opinion, I think the Fox Neo is pretty nifty and there is some value added. It's not something for everybody, but it is available if you're interested. Let us know down in the comments, do you think the Fox Neo and wireless suspension is the future of mountain biking? Or is it just a silly gimmick that nobody needs? That's all I've got. I'm gonna continue riding this suspension and we'll see you next time.